November the 17th, 1944. Lieutenant Henry T. Mills is fighting to keep his crippled B-24 in the air. 2 engines are gone from flak. The fuel is bleeding out. The Adriatic Sea is below. He has 2 choices: bail his crew out over open water or attempt a ditching. But there's something Mills knows that terrifies him. The B-24 was a death trap on water. Its high-mounted Davis wing created massive stress on the narrow fuselage during impact. The bomb bay, the weakest point, would collapse first, snapping the aircraft in half. The crews knew its weakness on water. They knew that ditching survival rates were really low. At 8,000 feet, Mills gives the order anyway. The navigator confirms the crew are in position and ready to ditch. The moment Lady Luck hits the water, she does exactly what B-24s did. She breaks in half at the bomb bay. The entire rear section, with 7 men inside, sinks in seconds. Mills escapes the cockpit, his co-pilot and engineer with him. They try swimming for shore. Neither makes it. Mills spends 2.5 hours treading water until a rowing boat, manned by local partisans, comes out and picks him up. 80 years later, the wreck of the Lady Luck lies in 90 metres of water off the island of Bisevo in Croatia, broken exactly where every B-24 broke. Today I'm going to take you on a dive so you can see that fatal structural failure for yourself. And as I go through the dive, I'm going to tell you more about the B-24, why it had such a poor ditching record, the particular events associated with the B-24 Lady Luck, how come we know so much about it, and of course, I'll also talk about Henry T. Mills, the pilot, and the only one of the 10-man crew to survive this crash. For anyone who's not dived in this part of the world, conditions can be absolutely fantastic, and the island of Vis is a fabulous place to spend any amount of time. It's also an awesome diving location, but the thing it's mainly famous for are the array of World War II era American heavy bombers, so B-17s and B-24s, and there is a whole load of them that can be dived in this area, including the one that we're diving today, the Lady Luck. We're diving from Komitsa with Manta Divers, who are an organisation I've used quite a bit. Absolutely brilliant, and I can't recommend them enough. As you can see, just arrived at the bottom, and directly in front there is the brake. So this is the aft end of the main section of the aircraft. In front of me there to the left and the right are the wings, and that bit, as I've said, is where the brake is. Now it's inverted, as pretty much all B-24 wrecks are. So what we're looking at here then is the starboard wing, but the underneath of it, off to the right hand side there, is the inboard starboard engine. There is the tyre from the landing gear. Incredible to think that it's still there and still intact, and we'll come back and have a look at that in a bit more detail. And then the outboard engine on the starboard wing is the one just in the left of the screen. Now, to understand why the Lady Luck was here, you have to understand what was happening in World War II at the time. So the Allies had invaded Italy and were slowly moving their way up from south to north. As they moved up through Italy, they were establishing bomber airfields, and the bombers were heading up into southern Europe, into Germany. For damaged bombers that weren't able to make it across the Adriatic, a small relief runway was established on the island of Vis, just off the west coast of what is now Croatia, and that's where the Lady Luck was heading for. Unfortunately, as we've already heard, it didn't make it. It was actually really close. In the report, Lieutenant Mills, Henry T. Mills, reckons they were about 15 minutes away when the 2 other engines gave out, and he was forced to make that awful decision whether to get the crew to bail out or whether to try ditching, which is obviously ultimately what he did. Now, we don't know which engines it were that were hit by flak. So it's entirely possible that it's the two that we're just coming back to have a look at now, the starboard ones. Equally, these could have been the ones that got him almost safely back from Vienna to the relief landing ground at Vis. I don't know. None of the engines look in particularly good order. That one there, as you can see, is pretty heavily smashed up. You can also see the undercarriage just to the right. You can see where that tyre came out of. And here you go in front of us there. There's another engine. No sign of props, which is quite interesting. Or if they are, I can't make them out. This is us now coming up into the cockpit area and also the area where the nose turret would be. Now, once again, remember it's upside down, but also it was clearly quite badly damaged, possibly during the impact, also possibly as a result of subsequent activity. So lots of fishermen operate in this area, and it's entirely possible that what they've done is they've somehow damaged the remains of the aeroplane. In fact, my understanding is how most of these deep aircraft are found is because fishermen report snags. So difficult to say for certain, but what we can say for certain is we're now on the port wing. You can see there, that's the outboard engine. The undercarriage with the tyre was just to the right there. In fact, there it is. You can see there it's actually in much better order than the one on the other side. And there we are swinging back towards looking at the cockpit area. And this is where Henry Mills would have been. This is where he escaped from. This is where the other two guys who got out with him escaped from as well. Now, one of the interesting parts of the story is why two of them decided to swim for land and Henry Mills stayed where he is. The wreck is only about 500 metres away from the nearest island, the island of Bisevo. So you can probably see why they thought it was okay. They both had life vests on, supposedly, and Henry didn't. So he decided that he didn't want to use energy trying to swim to the island. He decided to use his energy to stay, in the water and hope somebody was going to come out. Now, just going to break the story for a moment there, because what you can see in the bottom, which would have been the top of the break there, is a whole load of oxygen bottles. Clearly, these bombers operated at high altitude and the crew needed oxygen to continue to function normally, and that's what those are there. So the diver now is heading over towards the tail. It's got that very distinctive double tail that the Liberator has, but also you can see how it's completely split and broken off from the rest of the wreck. And this is the area in which the 7 missing crew members would have been. Now, supposedly it was really well known that the ditching survival rates from B-17s were really low, and one of the statistics I've seen is less than 40% of the people who ditched survived. I mean, certainly in this case, clearly there was a 90% casualty rate. Now that there is looking into, I think, the end of the fuselage, and this is the area exactly where the men would have been as they prepared for the aircraft to ditch. So 3 guys in the front, 7 guys in the back. I've read an account of a survivor of a B-24 ditching who was in the back, and he describes an absolute scene of pandemonium as the aircraft does exactly what this one did, which is to break into 2, and then the guys who were in the back tried to escape. Some, obviously they weren't strapped in or anything, so some of them were knocked unconscious. Others suffered significant injuries, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it just doesn't even bear thinking about what it must have been like in those moments as the aircraft hit the sea, split open, and then, whatever happened. So the only body that has ever been recovered from the B-24 Lady Luck is a guy who was found floating on the surface. Guy Pledger, he was one of the gunners. The remaining 8, no idea. It's entirely possible that some of them are still in the remains of this plane, still in that rear fuselage, which is always a pretty sobering thing to think, although I can't imagine there's much of anybody left after this amount of time spent at the bottom of the seabed. People may know that the Americans do fund missions where people go and try and recover bodies from some of their planes. So there are two other aircraft on Vis, a B-17 and another B-24, where bodies have been recovered, or certainly parts of bodies. I mean, my understanding is the bits they found are not very significant. Now, I think what's interesting here is that the videographer, Franco, has turned off his video lights, so you can see that it is pretty dark down here at 90 odd metres. Although there is an amount of ambient light, so you can probably see he's just coming back to the main bit of the plane and just taking a bit of video there. I think he is going to turn his lights back on in a second, so if you hang on there. I also think it's worth just talking about why the B-24 was such a bad aircraft for ditching, and fundamentally it's to do with the wing design and the fact that the wings were up high on the B-24. That meant that when it was ditched, there was a much smaller surface area than, say, a B-17 where the wings are low. Also, the bomb bay doors were known to open on impact, or they would be pushed inwards, and then water would actually get into the aircraft. And if you think about where the bomb bay doors are, that is where the aircraft splits, or where this aircraft has split. And it was, even at the time, it was well known that this happened. So I guess one of the interesting things is why they chose to ditch the aircraft rather than bailing out. And I guess that's because parachuting into the sea is also a really dangerous thing to do. I think, they were faced with two really poor choices there. And clearly the pilot, Henry Mills, decided that ditching was the least worst option. And that's what he tried to do. And I guess it worked for certainly three of them anyway. Now, as you can see on the video here, we're just going back to the split. And this is where the bomb bay doors would have been. I think we've already had a look at this bit, and we've seen those oxygen cylinders that would have been in the roof of the aircraft roof of the kind of the middle section. But the other interesting thing to see here is if you have a look to the left-hand side, you can see there is some fabric, some white fabric with some what to me look like thin lines on it. Now, I believe that those are parachutes, and that is parachute silk. I don't know for certain, but it looks an awful lot like that to me. And I know on some of the other aircraft, the other heavy bomber aircraft, parachutes have survived and parachutes have been recovered. So my guess is that is what those are. And also an incredible, tangible link to the people who were once on this aircraft. Incredible. I just love those kind of things. It just takes you straight to them. They would have been really important to the crew, and I don't think they would have carried spares. So that parachute, or parachutes, however many there are in there, those belonged to some of the crew members of the B-24. As you can see, the diver is heading back towards the tail, and I think this is because this is where the shot line is. I think it's just off to the right-hand side, and so I think his dive is coming to an end. Now, one of the things I'd just like to cover towards the end of the dive is to explain how come we know so much about B-24, Lady Luck and Henry T. Mills. And the reason is because, like every good military, when he eventually got back, he was required to fill in a report. And that report is on file as, in the American terminology, an MACR, a missing aircrew report. And very matter-of-factly, it tells us what happened to the Lady Luck and what happened to all the people who were on the Lady Luck. So it's a really poignant and sad document to read, even though it's written completely in a matter-of-fact, this happened, then that happened tone. We don't get any sense at all of how Henry Mills felt. And I think one of the sad bits of this is I don't actually know what happened to Henry Mills. I would love to know, did he survive the war? Did he go back to America? Did he have a family? Did he think about these guys? It would just be lovely to have answers to those questions. If you're able to find it out, or some way of finding out, I'd love to hear. So please stick it in the comments. That would be absolutely awesome. But that's it. The sad story of the Lady Luck. The bomb bay door collapse, the break that I think the crew knew was going to happen once they hit the water. The incredibly sad loss of 7 men in that section. Navigator, radio operator, gunners. The incredible survival of Henry T. Mills, his 2.5 hours of treading water on the surface, wondering if he was ever going to be rescued. The matter-of-fact way it got recorded and then vanished into military archives. 80-odd years later, Lady Luck remains where it sank, broken in two, a memorial to the 9 men who never made it home. Just one more wreck amongst the thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands that exist around the world, all of them with stories that deserve to be told. I've got a load of these stories on my channel, so have a look around. I'm Dom Robinson, Deep Wreck Diver. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.